Come to order and go ahead and get started. The Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Seapower convenes this morning to examine Navy shipbuilding programs and review of the defense authorization request for fiscal year 2020 and the future year's defense program. We welcome our three distinguished witnesses this morning: the Honorable James F. Geurts, Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Good morning. Vice Admiral William Mertz, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Warfare Systems, and Lieutenant General David Berger, Deputy Commandant of the Marine Corps for Combat Development and Integration. General, congratulations on your nomination to be the next Commandant of the Marine Corps. Delighted to have you three here today. Thank you for your time and effort. This is our first public meeting as the Chairman of the Seapower Subcommittee. I'm humbled to be leading this subcommittee, and will do all I can to support our men and women in uniform. Today we have the smallest Army since World War II, the smallest Navy since World War I, and the oldest and smallest Air Force ever. At the same time, we face complex threats from China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. A robust naval fleet is critical to deter aggression worldwide, project power, and support our allies. Subcommittee on Seapower will provide vital oversight and support for our Navy and Marine Corps as they work to meet this increasing demand for global missions. I want to thank Senator Wicker and Senator Hirono for their leadership over the past 4 years. I hope this subcommittee will continue to work in a bipartisan manner. I fully expect that. Earlier this month, the subcommittee received a classified threat assessment and learned how our Navy and Marine Corps plan to operate in the face of these ever-growing new threats. As we begin consideration of the budget request, this briefing was very helpful in providing context for our next series of budget-focused hearings on shipbuilding, naval aviation, and Marine Corps ground systems. Thank you again, Admiral Mertz and General Berger, for your participation in that and for the private briefings that you guys have given us. In 2016, the Navy increased its minimum requirement to 355 Battle Force ships, a reflection of the strategic shift to great power competition. Today, the Navy stands at just 289 Battle Force ships. While I understand the Navy is reassessing the fleet size requirement, I believe the need for a larger, more capable fleet is clear. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the Navy and Marine Corps plans to achieve these requirements as soon as possible. In addition to a global security crisis, we also have a national debt crisis. Last month, our national debt topped $22 trillion. General Mattis and others have called the debt the greatest threat to our national security, and I agree. It's no secret that Congress's failure to pass a budget on time hamstrings our military and limits our ability to plan for future missions. While there are many factors beyond the control of this subcommittee, the Secretary of the Navy's comments caught my attention in December 2017 when he said, and I quote, "Continuing resolutions have cost the Department of the Navy roughly $4 billion. Since 2011, we have put $4 billion in a trash can, put lighter fluid on top of it, and burned it." End quote. Wish I'd have been smart enough to make that quote. That's pretty good. Budgeting by CRs is no way to run the government, and Congress must do better. In this regard, I'd like to hear from our witnesses today regarding this budgetary and operational impacts of continuing resolutions and the return of sequestration in fiscal year 2020, potentially. Additionally, I'd like to review a number of other shipbuilding-related topics, including the ongoing force structure assessment and the factors that led the Navy to conduct this assessment, greater clarity on the long-term funding plan and challenges related to welding and quality assurance with the Columbia-class submarine program, aircraft carrier programs, including the Department's proposal to inactivate the USS Harry S. Truman more than 2 decades early, as well as testing challenges in the lead ship of the Ford-class USS Gerald R. Ford, the Navy's plan to recapitalize the nation's strategic sea lift fleet, and options to improve acquisition performance on lead ships. This subcommittee will continue to work with the Navy and Marine Corps to build a larger, more capable fleet, while at the same time demanding the best of our every taxpayer dollar. I look forward to our witnesses' testimony, and I now recognize Senator Hirono and thank her for her steadfast commitment to this committee over the last 4 years.
My steadfast commitment will continue with you at the helm, and of course, congratulations for chairing this very important subcommittee. And of course, I look forward to working with you as we conduct active exchanges and dialogues with the department in order to reach the best solutions to the issues facing our sailors and Marines and their families. I want to welcome our witnesses, and of course, I have my congratulations to General Berger for being nominated to head up the Marine Corps. We are grateful to each of you for your service to the nation and for the truly professional service of the men and women under your command. We also pay tribute to their families because, of course, we always say that the families are a very critical part of the success of the men and women in our armed services. Today, our witnesses face difficult decisions as you try to balance the need to modernize and maintain our technological advantage against the need to support ongoing operations and sustain current readiness. The threats we face around the world require us to consider how best to get the Navy and Marine Corps the resources that they need. But we must make sure that any increase in resources does not come at the expense of important domestic programs that families, including our military families, rely on every day. Last year, we had the benefit of an early budget deal that included increases in the DoD top line. This year, we are again facing the constraints of the caps in the Budget Control Act. The President's budget attempts to finesse the caps for DoD by moving a large portion of the base budget into the Overseas Contingency Operations, or OCO, accounts that are exempt from the caps. I do not support such a gimmick and hope we can move quickly to achieve a deal on the budget resolution for fiscal year 2020 that avoids delays in getting the necessary resources to the department and to other parts of the U.S. government. Today's hearing deals with various aspects of Navy shipbuilding. These Navy programs play a critical role in supporting and advancing our country's strategic interests in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region, including from bases in Hawaii. With that in mind, this subcommittee has been focused on how we improve our acquisition, stewardship, and thereby ensure that we are getting good value for every shipbuilding dollar that we spend. 2 years ago, the Chief of Naval Operations presented us with a new force structure assessment. The Navy's 30-year shipbuilding plan last year would have increased the size of the fleet, but would not have met the 355-ship goal. This year, the 30-year shipbuilding plan indicates the Navy would achieve that goal in 2034. The attack submarine force goal of 66 boats would be achieved in 2048, the same as last year. The goal for large surface combatants would be achieved in 2029. The surface force would remain at or above the level through the remainder of the 30-year plan. Last year's plan would have achieved the goal of 104 large surface combatants for only 1 year during the 30-year period, the year 2024. Despite having a requirement of 12 aircraft carriers, this year's plan has a force of 9 aircraft carriers for a little over a quarter of the 30-year plan. This is a significant reduction from last year's plan, which had at least 10 carriers for all but 1 year of the 30-year plan. Some of this erosion in carrier levels undoubtedly relates to the proposal to cancel the refueling complex overhaul of the USS Harry Truman, which I'm sure we will hear more about, and we've already had some discussions with you. Last year, Section 915 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2019 expanded the duties of Secretary Geurts' position to include acquisition and sustainment, including maintenance matters. I'm very encouraged that the Navy is not ignoring a vital component of maintaining a ready and capable fleet, our national shipyards, and of course Hawaii has one of them. These facilities, again, including the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard on Oahu, are essential for maintaining a ready and capable fleet. I'm encouraged that the Navy has gotten serious about these critical assets that have been neglected, as far as I'm concerned, for far too long. I look forward to hearing from you this morning about how the fiscal year 2020 budget supports this plan. I also look forward to working with the Navy to ensure that the shipyard modernization program stays on track. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Arona. Now we'll hear from our witnesses. Secretary, I believe you're up first.
Yes, sir. Chairman Perdue, Ranking Member Hirono, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to address the Department of the Navy's fiscal year 2020 budget request. Joining me today are Vice Admiral Bill Mers, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Warfare Systems, and Lieutenant General Dave Berger, Deputy Commandant for Combat Development and Integration. Sir, with your permission, I intend to provide a few brief remarks for the three of us and enter our formal statement in the record.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to start by thanking the subcommittee and all of Congress for passing the fiscal year 2019 budget on time. The on-time receipt of the full budget allowed us to expedite the delivery of lethality and readiness to our sailors and Marines, while achieving cost savings through much more efficient contracting. It also helps stabilize the industrial workforce and our supplier base, both of which are critical to our success. The 2019 budget allowed us to continue to build the Navy and the naval force the nation needs. This year we'll commission 12 ships compared to an average of 5 ships per year over the last 20 years. By the end of the year, we'll have 296 ships in our battle force inventory. Not only are we building more ships, but their quality and capability continues to increase with each delivery. We continue to improve the acquisition and contracting strategies to maximize the output for every taxpayer dollar, including saving more than $4 billion for the construction of the 3rd and 4th Ford-class carrier and saving over $700 million on our next set of destroyers. Our fiscal 20 request continues our commitment to build a 355-ship Navy, as well as the other capabilities the Navy and the Marine Corps require to meet the National Defense Strategy. Our request is the largest shipbuilding request in over 20 years and funds 12 Battle Force ships in fiscal 2020, reflecting the critical role the Navy and the Marine Corps play in our National Defense Strategy. It funds 55 Battle Force ships within the future year defense program and results in a smooth and continuous ramp to achieving the 355 ships in 2034, a 20-year acceleration from last year's plan. This year's shipbuilding plan continues to reinforce the powerful combination of a strong and stable industrial base and predictable funding, as well as provides our initial estimates on the enduring cost of sustaining a larger Navy after 40 years of progressively smaller navies. Recognizing that effective and efficient sustainment of the fleet is absolutely critical, we've also submitted the first ever 30-year long-range plan for the maintenance and modernization of the fleet. This complements our 30-year shipbuilding plan. It outlines the growing maintenance requirements and the many initiatives the Navy is executing to improve the on-time completion of maintenance activities. It complements the many other actions the Navy and the Marine Corps are taking to improve the readiness of the entire force. Finally, the Department of the Navy continues to place a priority on fielding new technologies and capabilities, those needed to compete and win in the future. These include a wide range of unmanned capabilities in the air, on the sea, and below the surface, as well as new capabilities enabled by directed energy, hypersonics, artificial intelligence, and advanced sensor systems. Thank you for the strong support this subcommittee has always provided our sailors and Marines, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. We look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, sir. We'll now start the round of questioning. We'll do 5 minutes in the first round, and then we'll, time allowing, we'll go into potentially a second round. I'll start off, and then we'll move to Secretary Hirono. Secretary Geurts, following up on my opening statement today, and you referred to it in yours as well, regarding budget stability. And in a private conversation, you've said this is a key success factor to our Navy and Marines out there today. The Secretary of Navy also stated in testimony that a return to sequestration in fiscal 2020 could mean a $26 billion cut to the Department of Navy. And he provided a graphic. I think at each of our places, this graphic is here. Thank you for that. Showing the impact of what that would mean in the procuring 6 new ships and in the operation of our Navy and Marine Corps. Would you talk about the impact of that potential Budget Control Act, which is the law of the land? If that were to really take place, what would that do to our procurement plan? And then also, as an adjunct, I'd like each of you, if you have a comment, to talk about how CRs impact your area of responsibility. And we've had 2 years now where we've avoided them. We're halfway through this fiscal year, and we're facing the gun barrel right now of another potential for a CR September 30th of this year. And I'd like you to tell this subcommittee how dangerous that could be for your area of operation.
Yes, sir. I'll start out and then ask my two compatriots here to give their perspective. From the Budget Control Act, it would be devastating. We have really done well by having smooth, efficient production lines, well planned out. All the work we've done over the last couple of years would be completely devastated if we went into Budget Control Act. One, because of the magnitude of the act, and then it's further compounded because we would have to apply that under normal circumstances to each line item, which means each individual ship since they're line item appropriated. So the dollar amount would be devastating. The impact would actually impact every ship because we couldn't actually even balance the dollars as we go forward. So as we look at that from a shipbuilding perspective, all we've done to get out of the boom and bust and have a repeatable, efficient, effective program plan would all be thrown in there. And then as we've seen, it's taken us decades to recover from gaps we had in submarine construction from Katrina impacts. And so you would essentially undo everything we've done over the last couple of years to rebuild the Navy in an efficient manner.
Is it safe to say that future acquisition costs would go up?
They would, yeah. And it's not just acquisition. It will also be on the readiness and the maintenance. On the CR impact, if I look over the last 10 years, by my accounting, the average is we've been about a third of the year in the CR as an average over the last 10 years. And where does that draw? That draws huge uncertainty. I mean, I can talk about it at the program level. I'd ask General Berger and Admiral Mertz to talk about it kind of at the deck plate level. But with that uncertainty, then I have to create multiple versions of contracts. Everything we're doing on ship maintenance to move planning early gets thrown out because now you have to continually replan. We did 258,000 contracts last year in the Department of Navy, $110 billion worth of work. You'll now have to do that once, twice, 3 times. And then in particular with the 20 budget, where we've got increases in ship counts, those will all have to be rolled back. Increases in personnel to man the ships we're fielding, those will all be impacted. And then new starts like our new frigate, all of that would have to go on hiatus. And the real issue is uncertainty. If you knew it was going to be for 82 days, you could plan around that. You don't know when the CR is going to end, so you're kind of in an endless replan. And then I would ask my 2 teammates here to provide their input.
Yeah, we have about a minute left. I will come back to this later if we need more time, but I'd like to hear from these 2 commanders as well.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We'll speak quickly here. I think Secretary Geurts covered it, but in the simplest terms, it impedes virtually every area of our operation, and it's a crushing impact on morale for the forward deployed force. Under your oversight, we applied industry best practices as we tried to improve our efficiency, and we found the impacts even worse than we thought. And unfortunately, we have real data here over 10 years of CRs. This is not anecdotal. Through the renegotiation of about 10,000 contracts, 6-month CR in 18 cost us $5.8 billion in buying power. In real terms, that's the equivalent of about 3 destroyers that we were unable to execute. There's a GAO report in March that reinforces our assessment. The impacts, I think Secretary Geurts covered for FY20, but loss of $2 billion of reprogramming or shifting funding to the MILPERS accounts, $4 billion in operations and maintenance, nearly another $6 billion in shipbuilding that we will be unable to execute. So last year, we've seen a good return to good behavior and the high productivity. We got away from the bad short-term behavior we call survival tactics. And we just cannot go back if we expect to win.
General Berger?
Sir, it's an oversimplification, but I think at the Title X level where we work, we're going to trade modernization to pay for readiness because that's what we must do. So all the progress that they noted that we've all seen with on-time budgets goes backwards because we will absolutely make sure the next units to deploy are ready to go, as we have in the past. At the unit level where I came from in August, just 30 seconds on that, where Senator Hirono and I first met. Those commanders out there plan their whole training and education plan, their deployments, their exercises based on the budget they think they're going to get. And it's not even flow over 12 months. So if they don't know, if they go into a sequestration or a CR, the unpredictability that the Secretary mentioned at their level, they don't know whether they're going to Thailand or the Philippines or Australia or whether they can afford that. They have to write the contracts. They have to lay in the airlift a couple months in advance. We lost a lot of money when we were in a CR, buying airplanes, scheduling maintenance, laying contracts in for things that didn't happen.
So to put it bluntly, Russia and China do not face this sort of financial constraint with regard to their planning. Is that correct?
I'm not qualified to answer that. I just know the impact it has on us, sir.
Yes, sir.
It's not good.
Thank you. Senator Hirono.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the fact that you continue to focus on the damage done by CRs. And in fact, some of you probably know that the chairman and I were part of a joint House-Senate special committee to address the budget and appropriations issues, and both of us shared the concern about the continuing resort to CRs, but we were not able to come to a resolution or appropriate recommendations, which just goes to show how intractable this problem is. But certainly, putting a large part of the base budget into OCO funds is not the answer either. So I want to get to the public shipyard modernization issue, Secretary Geurts, because that's something that, as you know, I've been really focused on. So I do applaud the Navy for establishing a plan for modernizing the public shipyards, because up to now we've been in pretty much fits and starts and without a comprehensive plan. Does the Navy's fiscal year 20 budget fully fund the shipyard modernization plan? Because the fiscal year CNO's unfunded priority list is silent on shipyard modernization. So I want to know whether you're fully funded to do what you
Yes, ma'am. It is fully funded. We have put a lot of resources in it. And just to foot stomp your issue, the average age of our dry docks across all of our yards is 62 years old. And so that's just one element of where we need to modernize the shipyard, both recapitalize that as well as recapitalize equipment and facilities.
Yes, we know that there are major needs for modernization, so I just want to be assured that you actually have money to proceed with that. Are you considering any changes to the plan to accelerate specific capability expansion or specific productivity enhancements in view of the ship maintenance problems that you are facing?
Yes, ma'am. We are working to look at that. The shipyard plan kind of has three major lines of activity. One is recapitalizing dry docks. Mm-hmm. The second is productivity improvements by relaying out the yard. We believe that will get us 65% more efficiency just in terms of moving workers closer to the work. And then the third is recapitalizing the tools and the machinery in the shipyards themselves. All three of those are underway. Additionally, we've started master planning, and so at Pearl Harbor in particular is our first, where we've hired a master planner to help work through the details. We're going to do that in all four of the yards, to work through all the detailed planning of how exactly to lay out the yard to get us to the efficiency we want. My end goal is, as the number of ships goes up, we get the efficiency in the public yard so that we've stabilized the workforce there. We can deliver the increased demand through efficiencies in the yard versus having to hire additional folks to meet that growing demand in the out years.
Well, you also face the challenge of having workers who are retiring in large numbers, and you have a lot of people in the shipyards who are doing this necessary work with fewer than 5 years of experience. So there's that. You can move the people closer to where the work is to enhance the efficiencies, but you have the overall concern about where the workers are coming from.
Absolutely.
So, what are you doing on that part?
Yes, ma'am. So we have accelerated our hiring, and so we are at the level of workforce 36,700 we want in all the 4 public yards. We've achieved that a year early. As you indicate, about 57% of those right now have less than 5 years experience. And so we're employing a whole host of technologies, apprentice programs within there, taking best practices from around the world to get that workforce trained, capable, and stable, so that we can, as we improve the facilities, we'll leverage the foundation of a strong workforce that we've put in place.
I've been to our apprenticeship programs, and I'm seeing more women getting into those programs. Is that a potential source of really good workers? Are you doing any kind of particular outreach to women to work in our shipyards?
Yes, ma'am. I'll have a follow-up to give you kind of a more specific answer to that. I would say in the time here, we are looking for the best workers and fully leverage diversity wherever they come from. It's a great opportunity to help the nation out. They're stable, really important jobs for us, and we are looking to actively recruit and maintain that workforce.
Okay, I look forward to talking with you more about that. So moving on, for either you, Mr. Secretary, or Admiral Mertz, the Navy is requesting funds for 3 Virginia-class boats. I know my time is almost up, but could I finish my question? In fiscal year 20, instead of the 2 planned for fiscal year 20 at this time last year. And the Navy budget justification material says that since the normal advanced procurement funds were not budgeted before now, the 3rd boat in the fiscal year 20 request will not begin construction until fiscal year 23. I'd also note that last year, the Navy's 30-year shipbuilding plan through 2048 did not ramp up production of 3 Virginia-class boats at all. And this year, the Navy's 30-year shipbuilding plan includes the 3rd boat in fiscal year 20, but does not include a 3rd boat in any other year in the 30-year plan. So it's a little bit mystifying to me. And I can understand that you would request advanced procurement for an additional attack submarine in fiscal year 20, but why would you ask for full funding for a boat that cannot be built in fiscal year 20?
Yes, ma'am, I'll start out, and if Admiral Mertz wants to jump in, or we can come back around to it. As we discussed last year in the committee, our biggest shortfall, and as in your opening statement, as well noted, is in attack submarines. And that situation will get worse before it gets better. And so we're looking for any opportunity to accelerate that versus the other fleets we had. And while normally we would have just done the advanced procurement, since this is outside of the block buy, and because of the criticality of adding the submarines and trying to get that left of the Columbia production ramp up, we chose to fully fund that in 20 when we had the, we made the hard decision to fully fund that in 20 versus over a couple of years.
Okay, I may have further questions, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, each of you, for being here today. Let me start with the 355 ship target, which I understand is a result of the force structure assessment in 2016. Is that correct, Mr. Secretary? Admiral, I'll direct it to you.
Yes, sir, it is.
Now, I understand, based on testimony last year, that the Navy is currently looking again at the force structure assessment and updating that. Admiral, is that correct?
We are. That will be completed by the end of the year.
Completed by the end of this year. I wonder if you can give us a preview. I mean, a lot has changed since the last force structure assessment was finished. And I'm thinking of, in particular, the National Defense Strategy, which represents a significant shift, obviously, strategically and otherwise. Can you give us some thinking on how the NDS may impact the force structure assessment update and where you are in that?
Yes, sir. So I have not had a preview of the force structure assessment, but I can certainly comment on some of the complex variables we're inserting into the ongoing assessment. We typically do a force structure assessment every 2 to 3 years. It surfaces about 2 to 3 budget cycles, and it's driven by significant change in threat, change in guidance as the National Defense Strategy, which actually covers both. And then we work it through the combatant commanders, the O-plan analysis, campaign analysis. It's typically founded on the capabilities we have on how we would fight with the projection into the future. It does not typically identify new capabilities we need, best employment of what we have or we are projected to have. Some of the things we've entered into the churn of this force structure assessment is the shift, I'll say shift back to distributed maritime operations, which is very reflective of a peer or near peer type of competition we might face. Along with that came a recognition that we'll likely have to change force mix, not necessarily types of ships, but the numbers on either side. A strong look at logistics on how we would support a distributed maritime operation. We just finished the sea lift report in 18 of March, and that showed that the sea lift requirement is about correct, but how we distribute that into a contested environment is under review, and that will be part of the assessment. So all that has created quite a few moving parts for this force structure assessment. We were asked recently, do we expect the number to go up or down? I certainly don't expect it to go any lower. I would not be surprised if it goes up on several categories.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you about modernization. China, obviously, major focus, the major focus perhaps of the NDS. We know that China is in a rapid buildup of Seapower, going to exceed 400 ships by some estimates soon. The statistic that is perhaps more alarming to me, however, is the statistic that at least by 2017, as of 2017, rather, 70% of China's Navy was considered modern, so outfitted with the latest technology, including AI. Can you give us some visibility, Admiral, into steps that the Navy is taking to make sure that our fleet is not only large, of sufficient size, but also that we are indeed incorporating the latest technologies, including AI and others, to make sure that we have that we are on equal footing or better than our Chinese counterparts?
Yes, sir. So not surprising, it'll be somewhat of a similar answer. So on the front end of our assessment are the O-plan analysis by the combatant commanders who keep a very close eye on the threat. I will tell you, we're very impressed with China's commitment to modernization, their commitment to maintenance. Maybe some insight to the chairman's question on do they face the same type of budget constraints? We don't know, but we do know they follow our models, and in some cases are executing better than we are. This is part of our recovery and our recommitment. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, this all goes into how we would employ the force, and it will have an impact on the type of force that we buy. Some of these vectors are a little bit hard to track now. A lot of this technology is very new. But along with the last force structure assessment, the Defense Committee's also directed us to do additional assessment. Every single one of them has identified the new technologies we have to pursue, open the aperture, more distributed lethality, cost-imposing, attritable, which includes machine learning, artificial intelligence. All these factors are coming together for our reevaluation of how this force mix might look.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead, Mr. Secretary.
If I could just add in, we are absolutely, I would say, on the acquisition technology side, really focused on how do we stream new capabilities into both our existing fleet and future fleet much more quickly. Some really exciting stuff on architecture, digital twins, and whatnot. And so perhaps I can give you an update of that in a little more detail, because we are really, I would say the Navy's on the front end of bringing new capabilities into ships much more quickly, and probably give you some examples of that when we have enough.
I would appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By virtue of my service on several other committees, I just want to share something that I think is a rising problem that I think could be very important, and that is cyber attacks through subs of major contractors. We're seeing that in the utility field. We're seeing it also in military, and I think I hope it's something you can really have some urgency on. You can have a 5-person engineering headhunting firm that gets into the system of their general contractor and thereby can steal intellectual property, and I think it's something we're now seeing more of, and I hope that you can, put the fear of God into some of these people and not just rely on the big guys having good security, but the subs that have access into their system. That's just a point I wanted to mention. I'm a little worried about the timing of the Columbia class. Tell me about how that's coming. I understand it's getting tighter. There have been some problems, and the schedule's shrinking.
Yes, sir. So Columbia's schedule has not changed. As you know, we were fairly proactive in looking at critical technologies, demonstrating and prototyping those to the left of when we would traditionally do it in a program, learning some of the lessons of some of our other lead ships where we had technical challenges that drove delivery of that. The area that has probably gotten the most kind of visibility and has actually showed us we have work to do is on the missile tubes, large complex welds, finding the quality, understanding how we inspect those for quality. We had some of those issues pop up last year. That's eroded some of the margin, but has not impacted the schedule.
You're still within the
Yes, sir. We still have 11 months margin to the need date for those. So we're going to continue our prototyping activities to beat down any of the areas where we see risk in terms of construction. In terms of the program overall, they're close on their design curves and maturity. We are going to have a higher design drawing completion on that ship than any submarine we've ever produced before. So everything we're trying to do is to maintain margin, beat out the risk as early as we can, and then position that program for success. Because as you know, we do not have a lot of schedule margin on the back end of that program to get it into the STRATCOM fleet to continue that mission.
Because there's a potential gap on the other end with the retirement of the Ohios.
Yes, sir. We're tight. There's not a gap yet, but we don't have a lot of
Potential gap.
Yeah, yes, sir. We don't have a lot of margin on the back end. So Columbia is our #1 program. We are doing everything we know how to continue to drive risk out and deliver that on schedule.
Good, thank you. Admiral, how are we doing with the integration of the Flight 3 DDGs coming in? Is that going smoothly? Are we on schedule? Does it look like it's going to be a smooth transition?
Yes, sir. We're on schedule. The first one delivers in FY23. The last hurdle, really, for the phased integration of the capability we need was the final test of the radar, and that was just recently completed, and the radar did fine.
So that's ready.
Yes, sir.
Maintenance plan. You talked about maintenance, and I think I heard you say, at least implicitly, more aggressive work on maintenance. Better scheduling, shorter periods, because if we can do a better job on maintenance, we have more ships at sea. Give me a little more detail on what your plans are on maintenance.
Yes, sir, and I would say my largest focus area over the last 6 months has been on the maintenance side. We're doing, we have some issues in some of the new construction. We are not delivering yet to the degree I would want to the fleet and maintenance. My end goal is ships come in on time, ships go out on time.
Do you have data on seaworthiness or sea readiness per ship? It would be nice to know. Are they ready to be in sea? Are they at 82% or 62% or 90%?
Yes, sir. We can pull all that data for you.
For the record, I'd like to see that.
Yes, sir. Where I'm focused on, we've talked some on the public yard side of things. I'm also really focused on the private yard maintenance, where we do most of our non-nuclear, in fact, all of our non-nuclear surface maintenance, and doing a couple different things there. We are really taking a hard look, putting commercial best practices on inspections the government does. We have reduced those on our latest availabilities by 30%. My target's 50%, so we can operate as efficiently as we can in the private yards.
Because that equals more ships.
Yes, sir. We got to get them out on time, because if we don't get them out on time, that just ripples all the way through the force. Second piece is relooking at our contract strategy. We tended to award ships one at a time with not a lot of planning window, which made it really tough on industry to operate efficiently. So right now we're moving our award dates 90 days before the availability. My goal is to get those to 180 days. And then the third is reduce, we were doing a lot of higher headquarters contract changes versus allowing folks to fix things on the waterfront. We've already put those in so that changes under $25,000 negotiated on the spot. That's also driving a lot of efficiency.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. And Senator Hawley, thank you for bringing up AI and those capabilities, because I want to dive in a little bit more there. Earlier this month, I held a subcommittee hearing through emerging threats and capabilities, and we did talk about AI. And so we have the development and fielding of AI systems in our own formations, but we're also keeping an eye on what Russia and China is developing. And at what point do you assess that that artificial intelligence will be making a critical difference in the way Russia and China deploy their forces? Do you see that as an imminent action, or is it further down the line?
Yes, ma'am. My sense is it's on a continuum, so I don't think it will be, today this, tomorrow that. And I think with the way the Department of Navy, and again, both my compatriots join in, AI can apply to large things and small things. So using artificial intelligence on maintenance, how do we do smarter maintenance? Mm-hmm. How to increase the speed we can train, as well as some of the big kind of data analytics, decision-making tools. I think all of those are in varying states of maturity. Some of it's ready to go right now. We're looking to accelerate that into the force now. Some of the larger will take a time to perfect. That's kind of my sense of it right now.
And would you say that we are on an even playing field with some of our adversaries and where they are with AI?
I would say we're ahead,
okay.
But I would say that is we've got some stalkers that are catching up to us if we don't continue to focus on it. And then the Department, the Navy, as well as the department overall are really focusing on it so we don't lose our competitive advantage here.
So are there other recommendations? You mentioned maintenance, and that's always a great way to use AI through any of our branches of service. Are there things specific to our naval forces that you think would benefit by using AI?
Yes, ma'am, and again, I'll maybe ask two folks to jump in here. I think training is another one, how to speed up training and get really kind of personalized training. And so, as we said, we have a large workforce on the shipyard we're trying to train. We have very complex systems we're putting in the field with a growing junior force. And so, understanding how to fully leverage that, I think, will be critical. And then I would say at the higher levels, how we do decision-making. But maybe Admiral Merz, you want to jump in?
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate the question. This is a high-interest item for the Navy. I'd be happy to get with you in a classified setting on the comparative capabilities between us and at least the pacing adversaries. But we really think this is an enabler, not just for warfighting, but for peacetime operations, situational awareness, how we manage the force, where we place the force. We are still considered the largest, most capable Navy in the world, but when you disperse us over the globe in any one particular area, we are likely not the largest, and depending on how much time we have to respond. We see this as a critical enabler for both what we will call man in the loop, man on the loop, or just machine-to-machine discussions, and we're pursuing all that. Matter of fact, it's a very rich area where we are partnering with industry. We were hoping we could just adopt a solution, and we're discovering that industry is struggling with this like we are, and we have found a lot of middle ground we can work together.
Well, excuse me, I do appreciate that. I just think there's a lot more that we can do with AI, not only administrative tasks, maintenance tasks, but also as AI applies to autonomous vehicles and so forth. You know, we may not be quite there yet, but at some point we will start to see more autonomous vehicles out there.
Yes.
Autonomous boats, perhaps. Yeah. You're very personnel heavy, but.
Yes, ma'am. And so in this year's budget, we have over $400 million in 20 and over $3 billion in the FIDEP on autonomous ships. And so that was going to be my kind of final comeback. AI and machine learning, that combination to get the capability we want out of those autonomous ships is absolutely critical and something we're already applying to the autonomous vehicles we have, another area that's very rich.
Okay, very good. Well, my time is about to expire, so gentlemen, thank you. And Admiral, I may take you up on that offer. We can do a deep dive. Thank you.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. Good to be back with you, and thanks for good work that you're all doing. I want to talk about the Harry S. Truman. This is the first Seapower subcommittee we've had since the news came out that in the President's budget request there's a suggestion that the Truman not be refueled at its midpoint. The committee hears a lot, both in open and classified, about the continuing need for the aircraft carrier platform in terms of the capacity that it provides, but also in terms of the flexibility. It can be here, it can be there, as problems crop up in different parts of the world. The military has recently made a commitment to do a two-carrier buy, so those new carriers are important. But I think a lot of us were puzzled about a suggestion that you would squander an asset at its midpoint when it might have another 25 to 30 years of active life post-refueling. So this is really the first opportunity we've had to kind of ask, what's the thinking behind that? I know there's an ongoing study about how to get to 355 and what the mixture is, but if you could talk about the thinking behind the recommendation, that'd be helpful.
Yes, sir. I'll start out and then ask Admiral Merz to jump in from his perspective as a warfighter. So first I would say is we are all in on the Ford-class carrier. That's why we signed a two-carrier deal. We see that as the acting secretary said yesterday, we need carriers now, we need them in the future. So this is not a survivability issue or the Navy walking away from carriers by any regard. But we are looking at how are we going to be competitive in the future and what is the force mix that gives us the most competitive advantage in the conflicts we see going forward. That necessitated some bold moves and some trade-offs, quite frankly. And so what the department looked at is getting the Fords, getting that as our carrier of the future. That allows us to put the air wing of the future on and trade for that particularly in the out years of the FIDEP capability for some of these unmanned systems and some of these other cost-imposing systems that we think we need to complement the carrier of the future. And so that was the thought process. It was a tough challenge. It was a somewhat of a bold move, and we want to have that discussion early enough to have the robust debate it deserves, with an ability to continue to look at that and understand if it's the correct decision from everybody's perspective. Bill, would you like to add?
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you for the question. This is obviously a very, very big deal to us as well. Very important decision. It took a lot of thought. Our commitment to our carrier requirement is the Ford class. However, that requirement evolves over time. It is still 12 carriers, and we're committed to getting to 12 carriers. This is a warfighting investment decision. We have done a whole series of studies, including several directed by the defense committees, and they all push us in the direction of a more distributed force, autonomous vehicles, directed energy, rail guns, and all these things are investments that we decided now's the time to move out on. We know the security complex, the security environment is getting more complex. So having this more distributed, cost-imposing force, we think will complement the battle force. It is not intended to replace the battle force. The effect of removing the Truman will be realized in the late 20s, 2027, 2029, when she would have come out of the yards. So over that time, we're going to continue to validate this approach. We're going to continue to experiment. We will adjust in stride. We have a long history of doing that. Yes, this is a reversible decision, but we would like not to reverse it at the expense of these other capabilities we need to pursue, and every indication has told us we need to evolve and to pursue.
Can I ask you this? So you say the gap would show in 27 and 29 when it would come out after the refueling. I think the refueling was supposed to start in 2024. Is that right?
It would. So that would have started regardless. So the effect on the inventory, her not coming out.
Right.
Is when
Let me ask this. So there is still an ongoing study. So this is still sort of under some analysis. In that analysis, are you taking into account the effect on the industrial base of not doing the refueling? What we have heard from industrial-based partners that work on the refuelings is that they really worry that they're in somewhat of a fragile spot, and removing that refueling beginning in 2024 could jeopardize them. Is that one of the areas that you're analyzing as you try to reach the
Yes, sir. So the analysis I'm speaking of, the warfighting analysis, the analysis on the industrial base was done in advance of this decision. I'll turn that over to Secretary Geurts to comment further.
If I could, Mr. Chair, just have him answer that last question, that'd be great.
Yes, sir. And as you know, anything in shipbuilding is all about the industrial base. And while there is some fungibility in terms of the skill sets needed to do this overhaul, there is a lot of specialized skill as well. And so we've looked fairly closely at that. I think we will probably make some adjustments in the budget looking forward should the refueling continue to be off our plan. Where do we move the inactivations and look at that closely, work closely with the shipyard. There is a gap we see that it would cause. We have a lot of inactivation work to do, but we're going to have to work that closely with the shipyard to understand, and because we are going to have to preserve that workforce capability. So I don't want to trivialize that as an issue to work. We have some time to work as that workforce impact wouldn't really hit until 23 and then into 24. It's something we're going to have to work. We looked at it at the top level as we made the decisions, but it'll be something we're going to have to continue to work closely with the shipyards on.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Cotton.
Thanks, gentlemen. Let's keep probing that line of questioning from Senator Kane. So the decision about the Truman has been in the news a lot lately. We've been talking about it a lot here in Congress. So Truman's still good to go, though, until 2024. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Because that's when it was scheduled to enter its midlife maintenance cycle. When was it scheduled to come out?
2027, 2028.
Okay.
That's all part of the shipyard loading and how it.
So the decision that's being taken now will not have a real-world impact then until about 2027 or 2028?
Yes, sir, but the decision is only reversible for about another year.
What exactly is that real-world impact in 2027, 2028? Just in layman's terms.
Well, that's a little bit of a foreseeing threat vector analysis. So the way we approach it is, what capabilities might we need to predict what we think is coming?
Let me just in more in simpler terms, on your carrier fleet, what's the practical impact in 2027 and 2028 if the Truman doesn't undergo that refueling?
It'll be one reduction in a carrier through the,
For how long?
until she would have retired in 2048.
Okay. How much money do you save by not undergoing that mid-cycle refueling?
It's about $4 billion to not do the overhaul, and then it's a savings of about $1 billion a year in operating cost.
And you're proposing to put that money into Ford-class carriers?
We're proposing to put it into a whole spectrum of capabilities that will complement the force.
Could Congress resolve this challenge or this trade-off that has been created for you simply by putting a little bit more money into the shipbuilding program over the 5-year defense plan and then into the future?
Good. Yes, sir. So you will start in terms of practicalness in the next 21, 22. We normally order equipment, long lead activities for that. Then in 2023, 2024, you start the labor portion of that. And so, you know, as we balance the top line, we made that decision. Obviously, you could trade within the top line or add to the top line. Those impacts, the dollars in 20 are fairly negligible. 21 and 22 is really, if we don't make the hard decision by not doing it, you will have made the decision because we won't have the long lead equipment.
Got it. Simple answer, though, is, which the Department of Defense would usually tell Congress, is we can solve some problems for you if we give you a little more money. Right?
Yes, sir.
Got it. Let's talk about carriers and the role they play, and specifically the vulnerability to them. We hear a lot about the asymmetric threat. It's a classic example of a really expensive boat versus a really cheap missile. We're talking primarily here about China, just to get down to brass tacks. ISIS doesn't have anti-ship ballistic missiles. Against Russia in Europe, you're looking at primarily an air and ground war. Not entirely, primarily. So we're talking about China and its anti-ship ballistic missile fleet. These carriers are not just sitting ducks, though, out on the water, are they? I mean, how easy is it for China to hit one
yes,
of our
sir.
carriers with a ballistic missile?
This is the question that you know, I really look forward to answering. I can give you a lot more detail in a classified setting. I think we should do that. I will tell you, this is not a survivability decision about the carriers. We feel very strongly the carrier is more survivable now than it's probably been in the last 70 years. And we can walk you through why we think that, both from a capability standpoint and also on how we operate the aircraft carrier.
How fast is a carrier?
It's a little bit of a sensitive number. Fast.
Really fast, though,
Yes, sir.
Right? Has lots of defenses?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I knew some lieutenants in Iraq who were somewhat cavalier about incoming mortar fire on their bases. They used to say, big base, little bullet. Ocean is even bigger than a base in Iraq or Afghanistan, right? So big ocean, little bullet.
Yes, sir. It's the only runway that'll move 700 miles a day.
Got it. Which brings me to a final question.
I would like to clarify, that's not our defense.
I understand.
That's an element of the operations.
But speed is security.
Sure.
Final question. So there is that threat, though, of the anti-ship ballistic missiles against not just carriers, but any surface ship. Is that one of the main advantages that we have in our undersea capabilities, our fast attack submarines? They're not susceptible to that kind of anti-ship?
Yes, sir.
missile
So,
threat?
I mean, our whole approach to warfare is using cross-domain capabilities to affect whatever capability we need based in the face of the threat. The undersea capabilities for us, we think, is our #1 asymmetrical lethality advantage over anyone else in the world.
So as China's missile threat does, in fact, potentially force us a little bit further away from the first island chain, those fast attack submarines can loiter a lot closer.
Submarines will have to work a little bit harder.
And that's one reason why it's so vital that we maintain the shipbuilding pace for those fast attack submarines in the medium and the long term, and don't let, as Secretary Shanahan said the other day, a capability or capacity gap emerge.
Exactly right, sir. And we can make this argument on every shipbuilding line for what they bring to the fight.
Thank you.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Secretary Geurts, I was really pleased to hear you say to Senator Hirono that you reaffirmed the commitment to the shipyard infrastructure optimization plan. As you point out, the average age of our dry docks is 60 years old. You also acknowledge that the biggest shortfall we have is with our attack submarines. And as Senator King pointed out, and we all understand that the better job we do on maintenance means that we can have more ships at sea. So I was really surprised when projects from the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard showed up on the military construction list of projects to take money from for the President's border wall. And I was particularly surprised because I know you were at the Portsmouth Shipyard last fall. You were briefed on the projects which directly relate to our ability to expand the dry dock capacity there and allow us to, at the shipyard, to be able to do maintenance on more ships. So can you explain what the thinking is here, why we would take money from those projects that would back up our ability to address our backlog and submarine maintenance, attack submarine maintenance?
Yes, ma'am. So the list that was generated just based on those projects that met a certain set of criteria. That was not the list, as I understand it, of projects that were not to be funded. That will be a secondary process that the Secretary of Defense will work through. And I believe, and the commitments I have heard, is the Secretary of the Navy will have an opportunity to provide his thinking in terms of readiness impact and all the other impacts should any of those projects be defunded. So the list itself was just a list to a certain set of criteria, particularly those that have not been funded yet in 19, as I understand it. But that is not a list of projects that were to be defunded, as I understand it.
But you would acknowledge that there's some uncertainty about that. And I can tell you, having visited the shipyard last Friday, that there's a great deal of uncertainty at the shipyard among the people who work there about what this means for their future. And I would argue that if we want to send a clear message about the importance of our attack submarines and our Navy and what is really critical to our national security, that we would not put those projects that are critical to maintaining our attack submarine fleet on that list of projects to be considered for defunding. So can you tell me what the Navy's response was when you were asked to list projects?
Yes, ma'am. Again, that list was created to a certain set of criteria, not the value or importance of each one of those projects. It was a set of, have they been obligated yet? It was not a value judgment of the project. It was just a generic formula to a set of criteria the Secretary of Defense had put together. I will affirm the absolute criticality of maintaining our optimization plan. The Navy intends to put $21 billion towards that over the next 20 years. A lot of these near-term projects are absolutely critical, particularly in Portsmouth with dry docks, which are some of our oldest dry docks in the Navy, that we need to maintain those capabilities. And so I would be hopeful the folks in the shipyard don't take that as a signal of the lack of our commitment or lack of importance to that modernization.
Well, I think it sends a very mixed message. That is not a good message for the Navy, for the people who are so committed to ensuring that we have the ships that we need in the fleet, and for the country about what is important if we're going to maintain our national security. I would like to pick up on the question about our industrial-based partners next, because one of the things that I've heard is that there's a lack of Virginia-class parts available in the national stock system, and that the public shipyards are taking extraordinary measures to get parts, and that is often resulting in delays. Can you comment on that and what's the problem there and what we need to do to address it?
Yes, ma'am. So as we've gone to a 2 Virginia ship per year rate, as well as had more Virginia submarines in the fleet, we have had some parts that failed at different rates than we expected when we put the original supply system in there. Congress has been very helpful to fund in our kind of integrated enterprise plan, particularly parts that are common across our submarines and carriers, to allow us to invest in those suppliers, to get those suppliers up at rate. That's not only critical for today's operation, but as then we add Columbia on top of it, we've got to make sure the supply base is really ready to operate, not only to produce more, but sustain more that we have in the fleet, and we're continuing to work on that very closely. Appreciate the great support.
And so is that what's going to take to make sure that we have the additional parts? Is it to make sure there's more funding, or what?
No, ma'am. I mean, it's continued focus on it, continued looking at it. The other thing we're working closely with our supply base is allowing them to see the composite need between current construction, future construction, repair, and maintenance. That way they can size and they can understand the demand we'll be placing on them and make smart investments so that they're going to be ready as we continue to place more demand. This is a little bit of the, when we talk about supply base, you know, when we didn't build submarines for about 10 years, this shows in perfect, you know, clarity how long it takes to rebuild that base, how fragile it is, and how important the whole nation continues to focus on it. Because if you take your eyes off it or go on a bus cycle, it's really, really hard to get that back, particularly when you want to add new capability.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to, first of all, Secretary Geurts, ask about the submarine program. You're convinced that the three-ship program, Virginia class, TAC class, is a prudent and actually cost or money-saving way to plan going forward for this year so that we can continue at 2 ships per year and have that option of a third. And in the end, will help to save resources.
Yes, sir. Particularly as we look at that gap coming up, it will not, since we're going to fund it all in 1 year as opposed to we didn't include it in our kind of economic order quantity, it will not deliver as if it was a 20 ship. A lot of details to work through to make sure we've got it feathered in on the line, but I believe we would not have put it in the budget if I didn't believe we couldn't execute it.
Let me ask you whether you think that the training and manpower education programs are commensurate with the demands we're going to have at that yard and others that will be involved. Obviously, thousands of new workers are going to have to be hired. I've visited the apprenticeship and the training programs at Electric Boat and elsewhere in southeastern Connecticut, and my own view is we're going to have to be making a much greater investment in those training and education programs.
Yes, sir. Both, I would say both the submarine yards have been putting a lot of energy into that. It's a critical factor in terms of how well we can actually execute the programs we've had. And as we've seen on some of the Virginias, as we've tried to accelerate them, we've done a great job getting to 66-month centers. As we've tried to move to 60-month centers, we've seen some challenges in having a sufficient trained workforce. I think the programs are in place. What I would say is we're going to have to solve this before Columbia. And so to the degree this continues to help put us on a smooth growth path to the large number of workforce we're going to have to bring in for Columbia, that will benefit us.
The funding for many of these programs, for example, Electric Boat's going to go from 20 in its design apprenticeship program up to, I think, more than 300, comes from the Department of Labor, not from the Department of Defense. The Department of Labor's budget in the President's budget will be cut, I believe, by around 30% for training and education programs of exactly the type that are necessary for this purpose. Are you concerned?
Absolutely, sure. And I'd be happy to follow up with you in some more detail. And you know, we have had contact with the Department of Labor, and I would be happy to go over there personally. I know the Secretary of Navy has also had interest in this to ensure they understand the criticality and the priority of that to support the Navy.
Well, you and I are totally in agreement on the criticality of that funding. But if the President's budget is adopted, it simply won't be there in the Department of Labor. And so I hope that we can move forward together in trying to change that budget. It's not in the jurisdiction of this committee, but I think it's important to our national defense. Would you agree?
Absolutely, sure.
Thank you. Maybe I can ask you whether in your view there is likely to be a loss of faith among the general public when they see a carrier like the Truman, which has another 30 years of life, forgive me, scrapped, to put resources into other programs that may be worthwhile, and yet we are building more carriers. I have trouble explaining that to folks in Connecticut who say, you know, we drive our cars until we can't use them anymore, right? At least some of us do. And we don't just trade them in necessarily because we like the looks of another car, another ship, particularly when we're spending billions of dollars. What would you say to those folks?
Yeah, yes, sir. So, you know, the new carrier does provide additional survivability, additional capability, additional flexibility for the 50 years going.
And the Truman is not survivable. Is that the message?
No, sure. All I would say is that the existing Nimitz class are absolutely awesome carriers that are doing a great job. What I would say, though, is we are committed to the Ford class carrier and over time replacing the fleet with that newer class carrier. That's true. We made a hard decision in terms of trading off additional 25 years and the sunk cost that goes with that to some of the other capabilities. So it wasn't a trade of a Ford versus a Truman. It was in a broader perspective of we need carriers. We need them for the future. They're in every scheme we have. We also need some other capabilities, and given the budget limits we had to make some hard trade-offs. So I wouldn't say it's the Trumans of no value, and we don't assess any value to the Truman.
I would like to follow up because my time has expired, and I apologize, but just in terms of our conveying the explanation to our constituents in terms they can understand, I think it would be important to be armed with those facts and arguments. And I want to conclude by congratulating Lieutenant General Berger on your nomination to be Commandant. This may be the last hearing that you go without getting tough questions, sir. But we look forward to working with you, and congratulations. Thank you.
We'll now enter second round. If you guys have other questions, I have one I'd like to probe. Secretary, Director of Operational Tests and Evaluations, fiscal year 2018 annual report, talked about significant rents of the Ford class. There were 4 systems that are the most problematic right now, right? The electromagnetic launching system, the advanced arresting gear, dual radar, and then the advanced weapons elevators. These technical issues have caused delays, obviously, and also they talked about the demonstrated reliability. The question was also brought up in the annual report about the catapults, arresting gear, the elevators, and radar. Would you give us an update on those 4 systems, and also talk about the maintenance period that we're in right now? I think there was an 8-month delay. Now it looks like a 15-month delay. Can you talk about those two very important issues relative to the Ford class?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Both very important issues. So those are kind of the 4 new technologies we put in to the Ford class newest carrier design we've done. We hadn't done a new carrier in 40 years. I would say on the first 3, on the electromagnetic launch, the arresting gear, and the radar, I think we're in good shape there. There is going to be reliability we're going to have to test, and we won't be able to do that until we go to sea. We've done 750 traps and launches with the system, but obviously we have to get it in sea and put it through its paces. And so I'm fairly confident there. Elevators, we have 11 of them. 2 of them have been delivered. They've been operating. Cruise Force has full control of those. They've been operating reliably, and the feedback I've gotten from the crew has been very positive. We have 9 more we've got to work our way through, 2 uppers and 7 lowers. We're working our way through that particular area. So I haven't seen anything in the elevators that shows me that it's something we can't solve, but it is a lot of work to work our way through those pieces.
Sorry to interrupt, but the boat was supposed to be delivered in 15. As I understand, it was delivered in 17. So this is now 4 years in, and the elevators are still an issue. Is this a learning experience for us as we go forward in terms of new technologies and the application on these lead ship developments?
Yeah, absolutely, and happy to kind of talk lessons learned we're putting into kind of all of our new lead ship designs. But certainly I would say, and again, I was not there at the time, so you know I have the benefit of looking backward. We did not build the ground test infrastructure for these new technologies to prove them on the ground before we, you know, proving it the first time for the elevators on the ship is not been the right path to go forward. Something, you know, we don't want to repeat on other ships. The other thing I would say is I am commissioning. I talked, I think, in November about I'm going to commission an independent review team for the technologies, not as much for the lead ship, but making sure that we have all the support, all the you know, technical support, spares, tech management, everything we need to do as these systems go to sea to ensure we've got everything, all the infrastructure in place to support the ship and the crew long term. So there's some immediate issues to get everything working on. 78 now just left to the elevators, a couple of remaining elevators, but I want to make sure we've got all the back end support in place so when that ship goes to war, the captain can take her out with complete confidence and understand that everything will work and we've got, you know, all the proven reliability and support needed. In terms of getting out of the availability right now, we've got three causal factors causing a delay getting out of the yard. I never want to deliver something late to the fleet, so I view that as a failure on my part of getting that ship out on the schedule we had. We intended it in July. Right now, my best estimate is October. That's driven by three causal factors. One is repairs and changes made to the nuclear propulsion plant based on lessons we learned out of sea trials. The second piece is just a balance of all the things we had intended to do and the availability, just a kind of scope of work. And then the third is finishing up those remaining elevators and getting those to the point where the crew's got access and can use all of them.
Good. Yes, sir. Thank you. Senator Hirono.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to the request for 3 Virginia-class boats, so Secretary Geurts, how concerned are you about delays in the current submarine construction program where we are only building 2 attack boats per year and construction on the Columbia-class strategic missile submarine program has barely started? So what does this performance say about the ability to ramp up production for an extra attack boat, the 3rd boat in fiscal year 20, or the advisability of ramping up production in fiscal year 20 with no plan for building 3 boats per year during any other year in the 30-year shipbuilding plan?
Yes, ma'am. So I would say strategically, one of the things we tried to do on the 30-year shipbuilding plan, and one of, I think, the real benefits of this year's plan versus last, is you saw us smooth out that production and growth profile. And maybe in a follow-on discussion, Admiral Mers can talk about the benefits of that. That's, I would say, generically, because the better we can smooth that out, the better it helps training and manpower and all the other pieces. On Virginia specifically, as I said, we started with an 84-month span. We've gotten those ships down to 66 months. Our goal was to try and drive them all the way to a 60-month span time at 2 per year. We're struggling a little bit to get all the way down to 60 months. And so adding the 3rd one in, we're going to have to work that. It's a little bit challenging from the perspective of it will look different because we don't have the advanced procurement. You know, we've done it all in 1 year. But we've also got a block buy 5-year program to kind of feather that ship in. And so I worry very much about ensuring as we grow that submarine enterprise, we can do it smartly, repeatably, and sustainably. And we were already going to be somewhat challenged going from 2 submarines in Virginia to add Columbia. This will be a good opportunity to continue to pressurize that system and work out where do we have weak spots and friction points as we get ready for Columbia to size that workforce and capability there. So I think to some degree there'll be some benefit to moving in there, but something we're going to have to watch very closely.
You're going to need to watch that very closely because I recognize that our submarines provide us with the asymmetric advantage in warfare. So because you're being very aggressive in terms of the production of our submarines, that we're going to need to make sure that you are totally on top of that. Now, going back to the refueling of
Senator, if I could just pile on to complete the answer here. It's well documented, the value we put in the submarine force and the gap between the requirement and where we are today. It's also a great example of what happens when you walk away from a shipbuilding line for a decade like we did in the 90s, and you get to the point where there's only so much you can do to recover. All that drove to get that third submarine into the 20s. To your specific comment, the next multi-year plan does include options for a third submarine for FY22 and 23. Time will tell on how we.
All right, so we'll be getting that assessment soon.
Yes, ma'am. That's stated in the shipbuilding plan, and that was actually directed by the defense committees to include that in the next negotiation.
Turning to the refueling of the Truman, so our aircraft carriers are very much a big part of our forward presence, and that's really important, and particularly with China and North Korea. And so you explained that this was a hard trade-off because of budget considerations. So as Senator Cotton said, that if we were to give you more money, you'd keep the Truman in place, wouldn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
Would that be your druthers?
Our druthers would to not surrender a carrier that has 50% of its life remaining, but we would like to not do that at the expense of moving out on these other technologies, what every assessment has told us.
Yes, but basically we should consider giving you more money, right?
Yes,
so
ma'am.
that you can not only save the Truman, but you can do these other, provide opportunities, as you say, Mr. Secretary, to invest in advanced and distributed systems that will shape future naval warfare to expand our competitive advantage. Secretary Geurts, you said that with regard to the, again, refueling of the Truman, I know that there are a lot of, it probably affects thousands of workers when we don't refuel the Truman. So you mentioned that you need to preserve the workforce. So for a number of reasons, everything, yes, does become a budget kind of a consideration, but it is hard to explain to people why you would basically have thousands of people who would otherwise be working on the refueling, and not to mention we're not getting the full life of this boat. Kind of hard to explain why we're not doing it if there's other ways that we can provide funding for that to occur.
Yes, ma'am. I mean, we will, it won't be as large a job if we inactivate that ship, and so that will have, you know, it will carry some of the workforce between this refueling and the next one down the pike. But we are going to have to watch very closely the skill sets in that refueling and work closely with the shipyard to balance all of that out because we do not want to lose that critical skill set.
No, and not to mention that the shipyards that were intending to do this work, it's not as though they don't have some fixed costs regardless of whether they do the work or not, and those fixed costs have to be borne by the taxpayers eventually. Thank you.
Senator King?
Thank you. All this talk about submarines, about aircraft carriers, I was fortunate enough to spend a couple of days on the George Washington at sea, and the captain greeted me and said, "You're going to be staying in the Admiral's quarters," and I was feeling pretty cool because I was staying in the Admiral's quarters until I found out it's right under the catapult. And they were doing night landings. So maybe the electromagnetic catapult will be a little less noisy. I don't know. A couple of things. Admiral, we're talking about a future large surface combatant to be the next generation after the DDG 51. Tell both of you, if you will tell me where that project stands, what you think of it, and where you're thinking of in terms of timing.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll start with kind of timing piece, and then Admiral Merz can kind of talk capability where we're thinking at. Right now, it's the first one being 25, and so the immediate work.
When you say 20, would you say delivery in 25?
No, sir.
Initiation.
Initiate. So right now, it's outside the FIDUP, first year outside the FIDUP. Money in the budget to start doing the development, prototyping, understand. So as we understand, work closely with Admiral Merz on the requirement and with industry on what the state of technology is. Our intent is looking at prototyping, looking for those high-risk areas where we need to prototype some of that technology so that we don't have some of the repeat lessons of some of our previous lead ships where we kind of went right into lead ship. And so that'll be an activity we're going to mature over the year. So similar to what we've done on frigate, we'll have a very interactive conversation with both industry and our technical warrant holders, understanding the balance of risk.
We're at the very beginning of that process.
We're at the very beginning of that.
Finalizing requirements and
yes,
getting
sir.
Toward Admiral.
Yes, sir. So we learned a lot from the frigate program, bringing in industry early, discussing the art of possible ahead of the requirements generation, where in the past we probably got in the bad habit.
And looking at existing designs too as a base.
And looking at existing designs. Existing designs are going to be part of the large surface combatant review as well. Matter of fact, the aperture is wider on the larger ship than what we started off with the frigate. We're very happy with how the frigate is progressing. The lethality of the ship is going to be higher than we initially thought we were going to be capable of getting. I think that will affect probably the ultimate numbers of large surface combatants we need. That will all be part of the force structure assessment as we're coming through that. With the lessons learned from the MQ-25 unmanned tanker, the frigate effort, we are going to work with industry this year to see if the art of possible also includes accelerating that ship potentially to FY23 or FY24. We are motivated to get our surface ship mix correct per our future surface combatant analysis studies. That included the frigate, that includes the large surface combatant, and that includes this whole family of unmanned systems that Secretary Geurts commented on. It was a massive investment this year in the President's budget.
General, you've been the forgotten man this morning. What about sea lift? I'm worried that we're focusing all on the combatants, the submarines. Are we at where we need to be in terms of planning for additional sea lift capacity?
I'll ask my.
We got to get your Marines ashore.
I'll ask my teammate to jump in on the sea lift. Probably two parts of it. One, the strategic sea lift from CONUS across, and the other one, the more operational to tactical level sea lift that deploys and then postures the force as needed, all of which is aging, and all of which the Navy and Marine Corps are working hard to resolve. And there's three different approaches, which I'll ask my teammates to talk about. But in the end, we have to be able to move the forces we need to, which is, we know that figure, and it's pretty steady, the size of the force. But the speed at which we need to move them and the reliability of those ships is what we got to tackle. Mr. Geurts.
Yes, sir. I think just from the current force requirements, pretty constant for heavy lift. We just need to go recapitalize that. And so we've got kind of three lines of attack. Buy some.
But we're on a schedule where we won't have a gap in capacity.
We're on a schedule where we don't have a gap in capacity, but those are aging pretty quickly. So we're really looking hard at that current kind of heavy lift fleet. We were going to do some service life extensions. We'll continue to do business case to see if that makes sense, and then come back to the committee if there's opportunities to accelerate that, maybe buy some more used ships as opposed to keeping the old ones around. We're working our way through that. Bill's done a lot of work on the, I'll say, the new sets of requirements, and probably worth a minute if you like on where we're thinking there.
Yes, sir. So the requirement work we've done in what we call the off-season here is reflective of how we shifted our whole fleet employment model of distributed maritime operations, which really is a return to what it looks like to face a potential peer. Part of that is the logistics support. The strategic lift coming over, we'll get it into a safe area, so then now what? What do you do with it to distribute it and to distribute it into a contested environment? So that is an evolving requirement. It is reflected in some of the work we're trying to do on the existing ship lines and our unfunded priority list. As we look at logistics, we look at repair, we look at hospital ships. We know that the two hospital ships are not enough to support us in a distributed maritime operating environment. So all this, we're expecting a requirement to continue to grow. We know the capabilities we need. The capacity is still under review. That also will be fed into the force structure assessment. Lighter, faster ships that can serve those specific purposes, but also carry a lot of gear for the Marine Corps quickly and efficiently.
I just want to be sure we're talking about all these exciting attack ships. We don't forget that sort of workhorse piece.
It's on our radar, sir.
Yes, sir.
Could I
Probably
ask one
captured
more
the
quick
most of
question,
our time.
Mr. Chairman? Could I ask one more?
Absolutely.
Sorry. yesterday we had the Army budget hearing, posture hearing, and there's a term I've been learning in the last few days called OCO for base. Does your budget include OCO for base?
Yes, sir.
What percentage is it? Do you have any idea? In the Army, it was 34% of their budget was OCO. Half of that was OCO for base, and half of it was traditional OCO. You can take that for the record. I appreciate it if you would. It's a concern to me, Mr. Chairman, because it's really not honest budgeting. We've got to be discussing that.
Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate it, gentlemen.
Yes, sir. I'll get you the exact number, but it's on the order of our OCO request last year was about $5 billion. Our OCO request this year is about $35 billion. And so that shows you the difference in terms of OCO and OCO base. But I'll make sure you have the exact number.
The Army, it was $62 billion.
It's actually $27.7 billion.
Thank you.
Secretary, I want to talk about the lessons learned, and I want to look at a little history here. And these examples are not, we're not on your watch or the leadership of the Marines or the Navy currently, but I want to see what you're doing now to address the lessons, hopefully, presumably learned by these. But for the last, if you look at the last lead combatant ships that have been delivered, a total of $8 billion more than initial budget was required to construct these ships. And they had a cost growth of an average of about 10%, but included 3 lead ships that exceeded their initial budget by 80% or more. 3 lead ships, 80% or more. And each lead ship that was delivered to the fleet was at least 6 months late, with 5 of these lead ships being more than 2 years late. And we already talked about the Ford being $2.5 billion over budget, 20 months late, and still not operational today. What are you got in it a little bit earlier, and I wanted to come back to your response to that to probe a little bit. Can you be more specific about what we're doing now in this budget that we're looking at going forward that builds on the learning that you have from, say, those last 8 lead ship combatant ship deliveries?
Yes, sir, and I wasn't there for all of it, so I won't pretend to second-guess decision-making back then.
That's fair.
I'll just give you my perspective kind of here, and to your point, the second kick of the mule, you don't learn a lot. So we're trying not to relearn old lessons without attacking it. I would say a challenge in shipbuilding is your lead ship is your development ship. And so that provides a little bit different nuance than in an airplane program or some of the other things. It's not better or worse, it's just kind of the fact we go at it. And so you tend to get a lot of learning in that first ship, because no matter what you do prototyping-wise, you still have to get it into platform, get it into operations. And so we are, there's some unique elements to it. Having said all that, we have not produced the ships in the lead ship realm the way we wanted to and got them out to the fleet at the speed and with all the capability we wanted to. So I would say there's 4 basic things we're doing to get after it. The first is my teammate here in terms of requirements, much better integrating acquisition and requirements. And so it's not a transactional exchange, it's an integrated exchange. And you've seen us employ that on frigate, where we've had, with industry's involvement, a much better informed requirement setting activity. Because after all, if we don't have the requirement right, we'll chase that through the whole ship. The second piece is really improve subsystem prototyping, like we've done on Columbia. Try and get everything prototyped as soon as we can. Learn some lessons on Ford by not having land-based prototypes for all the subsystems. We're chasing that right now a little bit. So that would be the second area. Third, I would say, is ensure we have the talent. All of the services lost some organic talent when we went through this massive downsizing in the 90s. At NAVSEA, we went from 700-ish naval engineers down to 200. We are now back to 600 there, and so regaining the government talent and making sure that talent's got the skill for the work going. I look across the entire naval enterprise in terms of talent. We don't have the talent completely matched to the new needs, so we're working our way through that process. And then the last, I would say, is I've got an independent team right now reviewing the entire naval research enterprise to make sure we are investing in technologies, to make sure we have the right talent, so that we're feeding into the process the right technologies with the right experience so that we can make smart decisions. When my teammate asks for a capability, what are the technologies that would best fit that capability? Those, I would say, are the 4 things we're doing now to address that very important question you asked.
Well, that's very helpful, because it seems to me from the outside looking at this with a fresh set of eyes that, you know, innovation and quality and quantity are needed right now in dealing with these peer adversaries out there. And General Hyten chilled us a couple of weeks ago when he talked about we have lost our ability to go fast. I don't totally accept that, but we've got to win at this success factor, I think, is a combination of great innovation, but timeliness in delivery too.
Yes, sir. And the other thing I would say is we're really differentiating the work. And so the time to get a lead ship that we're going to keep for 50 years is different than the time that I want to get an AI algorithm into that ship or a new sensor into that ship. So I would say on the flip side, what we've been able to do in the submarine force, the other day we did a launch from a digital twin of an Aegis combat system, which we virtualized. That's really helping us speed new capability onto the ships more quickly. So there's a lead ship set of issues that we have to deal with, and then there's a speed to get new technology, capability, invention, whatever. So we want to have a deliberate and predictable and high confidence lead ship approach, and then we want to have a high speed, high iteration, turn time approach for new capabilities where we can get them in the fleet, get them in the hands of warfighters, let these guys experiment with them, and then we can figure out which we want to keep.
That's fair. Thank you. Senator Hirono.
Just have a few more questions. Mr. Secretary, you and I talked about a recent article that was quite critical of the Navy accepting ships before they're ready with all kinds of problems. So some of the discussion that you've been having with the chairman goes to the kind of oversight of changes, including hiring people, you know, engineers who can help you assess the kind of ships that we're accepting, all of that. So that is reassuring. You need to stay on course on that. Admiral Mertz, you are working on updating the force structure assessment before the end of this year. How will you be incorporating the shift to Asia and the Pacific as you consider expanding the fleet to deploy the number of ships you need?
Yes, ma'am. So the force structure assessment actually starts with the warfighting requirement, and the National Defense Strategy has set that warfighting requirement as the Asia-Pacific as the pacing threat. So first and foremost, that drives the assessment. We can't ignore the other areas, but it helps to have a driving one. For instance, we're very much closely tracking Russia technology developments. So they all feed into it, but the pacing threat is the Asia-Pacific threat.
Yes, so we need to make sure that we have the appropriate resources in that AOR. Again, with the cancellation of the Harry Truman, then what are the implications for what the new force structure assessment will include in terms of aircraft carrier force levels in the Asia-Pacific area?
So the force structure assessment does not start with any preconceived force level. It will do a model. Typically, the model is unconstrained up front. It usually comes up with a very large number for all ship classes. And then we apply operating guidance on where we might take risk, deployment models, and we work the number down to where we think it's about the right level. And from there, it comes up with a number for each ship class, and when you add all those up, the current one adds up to 355. Where the other one goes, I don't expect it to be a smaller number, but what each one of those ship lines contributes to that will likely change to some degree.
So are those decisions that ultimately to be disclosed in a classified setting?
The analysis is a classified discussion on how we got there, but once we end up similar to the 355 and the components that make that up, that will be an unclassified number.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, your prepared testimony on page 5 indicates that operations in a contested environment means that the Navy's logistics fleet will need to include smaller, faster, multi-mission transports, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I do not see any specifics on a program to shift in this direction in the Navy budget, but could you give us a sense of what the Navy is doing or plans to do to shift to smaller multi-mission transports? And General Berger, how will this contested environment affect the Marine Corps' ability to conduct amphibious assault operations?
Yes, ma'am. So as Admiral Mers described, he's working through the requirements element of that fast logistics in the contested environment right now. As that comes out, then we'll work with him on acquisition solutions to go there. I think in the good news category, that will be a lot of smaller, faster routes where I think we've got plenty of industrial capacity that we can leverage. We've had great success over the last year with a lot of small businesses delivering ships to the Navy. And I have not seen all the requirements output yet, but I think there's a rich industrial base and opportunity to bring in, additional capabilities through those shipyards to solve that requirement. We'll look at that in the 21 budget. That's probably where you'll start to see that show up.
All right, General Berger?
The way that we did logistics 40 years ago of offloading everything that's on the ship and build a giant pile on the beach that you could fight inland from are gone. That's never going to be able to survive. Hence, like the Secretary pointed out, the concepts that we're working on now are driving us towards the ability to be much more dispersed, much more distributed, and therefore the logistics be much more distributed. We cannot have an Iron Mountain on a beach, and no one's planning on that. But the ability to move troops, equipment, and supplies laterally through an archipelagic region is driving us in the direction that Secretary Geurts mentioned. Not great big haulers that dump it all on the beach, but much more smaller, more of them, faster, lower signature, all that. Yes, ma'am.
And that would, Mr. Secretary, help our industrial base, at least for the smaller companies. One last question, Mr. Chairman, if I can. Mr. Secretary, we're aware that there have been some problems with production of the Ship-to-Shore Connector, or SSC program. And this is a program that will replace our landing craft air cushion, or LCAC, that transport equipment and supplies ashore. What we're talking about. I see that you have not chosen to request any production for the SSC program in fiscal year 20. And will this gap in funding harm the program or cause a break in the production?
Yes, ma'am. I'll describe that, and if General Berger wants to, from a warfighting perspective, gives his thoughts on it. But the zero in this year's budget should in no way signal the lack of importance of that program or our lack of commitment to it. What it shows is some of the technical challenges we've had delivering that first capability, and a little bit of the production backlog we've had over the last couple of years. So from my perspective, there's plenty of production awaiting completion of that trial. That's queuing up. That will allow us to continue to sustain that activity. As we get the boat through its final acceptance trials, we get the initial ones produced. I think that is another one of an excellent candidates where we should look at block buying or multi-yearing, because we will want to get them into the fleet as fast as we can as soon as they're ready. So our initial, or our biggest role right now is completing a couple of technical issues to get that boat ready to go. All testing thus far has shown the design overall is sound. We've got a couple of technical issues to work through. As soon as that's done, we'll continue to accelerate that production line.
General Geurts, did you want to add something?
Last week, ma'am, had the chance to go down to Huntington Ingalls and then also to Textron. I think everybody on this side of the table would echo your concerns. We have 72 non-displacement LCACs right now. They've been, most of them have undergone a service life extension already, and some of them may need to go through a post-SLEP extension program. They were fine when they came out in the early 80s. They could haul 60 tons and go pretty fast and cover a lot of beaches. The ship-to-shore connector at 74 tons, faster, more reliable, is what we must have. So the risks you point out, ma'am, we're going to keep the older ones longer, pour more money into them to maintain them, and they will not be as capable as the ship-to-shore connector. But Textron knows what they need. They know the technical challenge that they're facing. They have the right workforce and the right leadership in place.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wicker.
Okay. I'm delighted to follow up on some questions that Senator Hirono asked. Let me make sure I understand Admiral Murs. There will be a new force structure assessment taking into consideration the warfighting requirement as guided by the National Defense Strategy. But you do not expect a smaller number than 355 ships. That was your testimony.
No, sir, I do not expect a smaller number.
Okay. And it would be hard to imagine, considering the threat that we have, it would be hard to imagine that your statement would be incorrect there. Now, Lieutenant General Berger, these smaller ships going through the archipelagos that you talked about, what would be examples of those?
Right now, we have LCACs and LCUs that move our equipment and our supplies from ship to shore. What I'm suggesting, Senators, we're going to need not quite planes, trains, and automobiles, but a family of connectors that can, on the surface, move our supplies, move our equipment around at greater speed between islands or between the ship to shore, between shore to shore.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Now, Mr. Chairman and Madam Ranking Member, we have a budget proposal from the administration, and administration budgets come and go, but we've got the responsibility of actually providing the authorization and the funding here, and we take that very seriously. With regard to amphibious ship procurement, I see that the budget defers some LPD procurement and LHA procurement till 2024. We'll see about that, but let me just ask about the need at the Marine Corps. General Berger, do we still need 38 amphibious ships indicated in the Navy's current force structure assessment?
That requirement is valid today, sir, but as mentioned earlier, the 2019 force structure assessment, we'll see what comes out of that.
Okay, but that's still valid, 38. How many amphibious ships do we have today?
32, Senator.
38 as compared to a requirement of 32 as compared to a requirement of 38. And do you foresee the Marine Corps mission eliminating amphibious operations at any point in the near future?
No, sir, I do not.
All right. That's very helpful. And let me ask you then, Mr. Secretary, Congress appropriated $350 million in FY19 to begin procurement of an LHA and an LPD. However, amphibious ship procurement was removed from the FY20 budget proposal, as you know. Instead, the Navy has deferred LPD procurement to 2021 and LHA to 2024. This move has the potential to disrupt amphibious warship industrial base, as there is a long lead time requirement for parts and materials, as we all know. Instead of deferring procurement to 2021 and 2024, could the Navy apply incremental funding to the LPD and LHA in FY20? Is incremental funding more advantageous than deferring procurement? If Congress approves incremental funding in FY20 NDAA for the LHA and LPD, would it allow the Navy to accelerate how it spends the $350 million that was appropriated in FY19?
Yes, sir. You would have to give us that authority. We have used that authority previously on LHAs, occasionally on LPDs. With that authority then and the funding we have in the budget, we could begin moving out on that long lead material. I would say for the OHA in particular, I think we're concerned with it in 24. It was there from an affordability standpoint. We're going to look hard in 21 budget at potentially moving that to the left as funding allows, because I'm also concerned with a 7-year break in that ship, and I do not want to lose the excellent workforce we have cranking out LHAs right now. So it's in the budget right now in 24. That is something we are all motivated to do, both from a workforce standpoint as well as its contention with Columbia as it starts ramping up in 24. Incremental authority on both those ships would allow us to get at that faster.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I hope we can help them get these done in a more timely fashion. Admiral Mers, DOD currently has an organic capacity of 15 million square feet on 65 roll-on, roll-off ships in the ready reserve force, with an additional 4.5 million square feet of roll-on, roll-off capacity on U.S. flag commercial ships through the voluntary intermodal sea lift agreement. These ships are vital to wartime logistics, historically accounting for 90% of wartime transportation requirements. DOD has developed a recapitalization strategy for RRF vessels to maintain capacity at an acceptable level of risk. Would you comment about that, briefly describe for the committee what the Ready Reserve recapitalization plan looks like, and what measures the Navy will take to ensure that the Ready Reserve vessels have their life extended in a reliable fashion?
Yes, sir. So I'll make a couple requirements, perspective remarks, and turn it over to Secretary Geurts on the acquisition side. But we revalidated the 15 million square foot requirement for the strategic part of the lift. The challenge there is recapitalizing it. It's in the fleet now, but it's old, it's getting older. So we're looking at creative and aggressive ways to recapitalize that fleet. And there's three levers we're attempting to pull. Building new would be preferred for the long-term health of the fleet. There's some commercial shipbuilding challenges with that we're hoping to partner with Congress to help resolve. There's buying used, either domestic built or foreign built used ships. And then there's also the service life extensions of old ships to make them even older. So you throw all that into a pile. We're trying to come up with the right balance to get after this. And then we have the previously discussed growing requirement of the tactical side of the logistics train. It's captured a lot of our attention as we have shifted to this distributed maritime operation and have a distributed logistics operation to go behind it. And I think we're postured well to start moving out aggressively. I'll turn it over to Secretary Geurts.
Yes, Senator Wicker. I think, again, both those three lines of operation are there. As we look at the commercial market and what's available on the commercial market for some of the fairly generic ro-ro ships, we think there's good opportunity to continue to look hard at that and perhaps relook at the business case and purchase some rapidly off the commercial market, accelerate that portion to get rid of our oldest ships that are, it's becoming less and less cost effective to extend them. And then we'll continue to look at new build, particularly new build for unique ships, which have unique missions that aren't necessarily found on the commercial market.
And so finally, and I appreciate the indulgence of the chair, I was glad Senator Hirono touched on the Truman. Mr. Secretary, this ship needs to be refueled, and if it is refueled, it's got a lot more life in it. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we've got a year or two to reconsider this decision, do we not?
Yes, sir. We'll have to start ordering some of the advanced materials in 21. So
21, okay.
Yeah, so we've kind of got this year, and then decisions after that start to become less and less reversible or more costly to reverse. And so we made this decision now when we have time to have it's an important decision. It's one that requires, full debate. We look forward to that. We wanted to make it at a time where we wouldn't have to completely rewrite the budget depending on how that outcomes in terms of the near year. I would just say there are some capabilities we believe that are required in the Navy, which we have funded at the expense of that. That was a bold move. That was a difficult decision for us. As we look at that and make decisions, I think it's incredibly important for us to really keep an eye on those capabilities and make sure we, to whatever can, we preserve the opportunity to continue to explore and bring those complementary capabilities into the naval fleet.
Sir, I'd like to just
Yes.
to add a clarifying point. The 21 decision means a Pres-Bud 21 decision. So this, we have this year to reevaluate the path we're on.
Thank you, Bill.
Sure.
Well, I think that's an important point to make, and I'd certainly want us to scratch our heads hard on that. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and General Berger, congratulations on being named Commandant. And that was some news whispered to me earlier today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
I just have one remaining question. And I wanted, before I do that, Admiral, would you clarify, I just want to make sure I understood that right for the record, that we could expect this force structure report sometime in the next calendar year, is that correct?
Yes, sir, by the end of the calendar year.
By the end of this calendar year?
Yes, sir, by end of
Thank you,
2019, we will have the assessment.
Thank you. And Secretary, you know, we've talked about China today. We haven't really talked about Russia. And Russia's the Russian submarine development over the last decade has been pretty impressive. A little scary, actually, with the development of the SEV submarine class and now the Caliber missile. Talk about a little bit how that development, in addition to what we see China doing, how that's affected this particular budget and your strategy going forward.
Yes, sir, and Bill can also, you know, give his warfighting perspective, but I would say taking it up a level, the National Defense Strategy from last year is really focusing us at kind of at that global competitive piece. Each competitor brings some unique attributes and risk areas that we watch closely. Our job is to figure out how to take that whole picture and create a force structure that can both be effective and allow us to compete and win, and then from my perspective, efficient and provide value for every dollar the taxpayer puts to this. Both of those are really what we're focused on. I think Russia is, again, a little bit of a different problem set. They certainly have some niche capabilities that we've got to keep an eye on, and we are doing so. And so I would say their niche capabilities drive some specific pieces. China's global capabilities kind of drive the overall force set. But Bill, you might want to add a specific to that.
Yes, sir. With in this form, obviously, the inability to address specific threats. There's this long-standing mutual respect between Russia and the U.S. on maritime capability, and it is an influencer on the capabilities we pursue in both quality and quantity.
Thank you. Senator Horno?
Thank you. I'm done.
Okay. Senator Wicker, do you have anything left?
Probably, but I'll give.
Gentlemen, that concludes the hearing today. I want to thank you for your personal investment today and all the information. This has been a very good hearing. But more importantly, I want to, as leaders of your services, please take back to the sailors and Marines out there that we're dead serious about trying to meet the needs of their mission, protect our country. We don't take this lightly. It's a financial issue. It's also a planning issue. And we will be earnest partners with you as we try to do that. So God bless you and thank you for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well done.